Eastern Conference semifinals, Game 7 yesterday at the Garden. Went to the Pacers in an historic performance. They shot the lights out, almost literally. They shot the season out for the Knicks. Jalen Brunson, whose brilliant playoff run came to an end. We believe on that play with a fractured left hand. It's still not 100% certain that that's where he broke the hand. Doesn't really matter in the end. Pacers wind up winning it 130-109. So they go on. They'll play Boston beginning tomorrow night. We will have all of the Eastern Conference Finals games right here on ESPN. So we'll get to that. Let's talk about the Knicks injuries. I mentioned before we went to a break, the Knicks' hallmark this entire season was their depth. Half the guys who've become folk heroes weren't even starters for the Knicks when this season began. But a series of injuries, just one after another. It almost would have been funny if it wasn't so sad to watch them continue to drop. The reality is that sort of thing has tended to follow their coach, Tom Thibodeau, around. It happened in Chicago. In Minnesota, there were issues, people believe, with how hard he worked them and all that kind of stuff. And now we have these injuries. If you take each one of them individually, you can debate just how much of a factor the coach is in all of that. It's a complicated question that doesn't have an easy answer. But Monica, I'll start with you. You're with this team every single day. How much of the Knicks injury woes are fair to place at the feet of their head coach?
I think, Greeny, you set it up, but I think people need to really understand. They were down 4 rotation players. Josh Hart did not start until the month of February-ish when Julius Randle goes down at the end of January and OG Anunoby is in and out. To me, you have to play. And if you go by the minutes during the course of the regular season, there were guys that played more minutes than Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart. I think they were in like the 10-12 range or whatever. So not a ton.
In the league,
but
you mean,
in the league,
not in the,
right?
on the team, yeah.
There were guys that played more minutes. Now, granted, they still were one of the higher usage guys in the league, but you have to play. Tibbs literally squeezed everything he could out of this roster despite injuries. They win 50 games, they clinch a 2 seed, and they have a chance to go on and possibly beat the Pacers if not for 2 more injuries. Even if this team had remained healthy the way they started this series, you give them a better chance because that means they would have had OG Anunoby. And then plus you have to look at some of these injuries. Bogdanovic steps on Nicholas Batum's foot versus Philly. OG Anunoby has an awkward slide on the baseline, and that's his hamstring. If you want to say the abdominal strain for Josh Hart, that might be the one that I'll give you in terms of the minutes that he's had to play. But you didn't have a choice at 4 consistently. He had to play.
What do you think, Jay Will?
I think all these are true. Like, I think that is the reality. But I think we also live in a world where perception is reality. And I think it's hard because I really wish that Tibbs would have been able to dispel that this year. But still, regardless of whether all those details are true, when you still look at the entire body of work, it's still easy for fans to come away with the assessment by saying, look, all guys break down. Like, I'm not saying that is a true depiction of what's happening, but the perception around that is something that Tibbs is not able to get away from. It's problematic.
You're 1,000% right, and that's where we come in. It's our job to educate people. Is it fair or is it not fair? That's the question I'm asking, Legs. There are Knicks fans out there who are all, it's Tibbs, it's Tibbs, it's Tibbs, it's Tibbs. That's the reason that we watched our heroes fall, one after another after another. Is that fair?
It's not fair in this case. Absolutely not. Do you see that? Can we put that graphic back up again of the players, those 5 players, injured players?
Yeah.
These aren't just dudes filling out the roster. These are significant players, heavy rotational players. If you add those 5 players to, well, forget Brunson because that hand came at the end of a game in which they were losing and the season was ending. Look at the other 4 guys on that list. Are you kidding me? First of all, Bogdanovic, imagine Bogdanovic in a series like this at 6'10" with his shot making and his defense. How much difference would it make? So if you add those 4 guys to the mix, we're not even talking about this with Tibbs. Nobody is playing 42, 45, 47 minutes if you've got those guys. They're playing normal minutes. Maybe Josh Hart a little bit more, Brunson a little bit more in a given night. These guys aren't playing minutes that are being questioned if those guys are available.
Wendy, you were
There
there.
are no Knicks without Tibbs.
That part,
This team is their coach, and they love him. And maybe there were other teams in the past where they didn't love him. There's no way forward with this team without Tom Thibodeau coaching this way. And not only that, they're going to give him an 8-figure-a-year extension this offseason because they have to, because his style has made it happen. We can argue about whether
I always do that. I just struggle.
It's not $100 million, Green. It's not $100 million.
Okay.
at least. I mean, that's the going rate for coaches. Go look at the Lakers right now. They're searching high and low. They're trying to invent candidates. You get a coach like Tom Thibodeau, coaches like this, you absolutely reward him.
So for that, I 100% agree. We're not having a conversation of whether or not he's an excellent coach. He's an excellent coach.
Yes.
I don't even think we're having a question of whether or not he is a huge part of the reason they got where they got. I think that's definitive as well. What we're having a conversation about is exactly what the question is on the screen. Because it keeps happening. Everywhere he goes, this happens.
The reason it's important is because the Knicks need a star player.
Thank you, Greeny. So this is what I was about to say. This, to Legs' point earlier about Carlisle, you look at this roster. If this roster were not to change, it needs to be sustainable because you only have one guy. Well, if Julius Randle's healthy, you have two guys that then can draw a double team, which is a fundamental principle when it comes to Thibs, right? But with this group, you had to hang your hat on the defensive end. You had to play your stars big moments. Now, if they grab whoever the big fish is in this offseason and they've got more firepower offensively, does Thibs have the ability to adapt? I believe so in this era.
But
He's
to
talking
your
to his
point,
guys
a
constantly.
star may not necessarily want to come here if he's going to play that many minutes.
Thank you. And
that is the challenge.
By the way, coming off Minnesota and coming off Chicago, you do hear a lot of rumblings from higher-end players who are like, I don't know if that style is sustainable for somebody
Higher
like me.
end in age or in productivity? Because that's the
In
young
both.
guys starting to take over.
Okay, well, give me the player that you think wouldn't mind playing those type of minutes throughout the course of the season.
I mean, of course he's not available, but a guy like Ant who just put out the 3-time MVP.
But Ant's doing that in Minnesota, though. So now we're going to take Ant off a chance to get
I said this is not realistic, but I'm talking about mindset.
I understand.
You know what I'm saying?
But like we're talking about one guy who's actually becoming the face of the league for Minnesota.
Look, following what people are saying on social media is, and by that I just mean people, anyone with an account, is generally a dangerous practice, right? Because anyone can say anything they want. But if you're following the end of that, it's a 20-point game, Game 6 Friday night, knowing they have a 40-hour turnaround. It is a 20-point game in the fourth quarter, and he's got all his guys out there. And that's what people are complaining
Went
about.
home after the game. They put their Knicks nightlight in the wall. They turned their Knicks. They got New York Knicks sheets on their bed.
Respectfully.
Okay, come on. These people aren't rational if you love a team. Fans are not.
Are they wrong?
Rational.
But
in this situation, they are wrong.
Those guys
they
are
are wrong. He didn't have a choice.
Game in the fourth
he didn't
quarter.
have a. They wouldn't have been in that Game 7 yesterday against Indiana without doing.
That's
fair.
When a star player says, I want to get out of my situation, and they're going to go and say, I want to play for the Lakers, I want to play for the Clippers, I want to play for the Heat, do I want to play for the Knicks? I do think it's a consideration as they're looking to get that giant fish. That's what they're looking. They're not looking to add another 20-point score. They want to wait for the big giant fish. You can come up with the names. I'm not going to have them attached to me. Will that
I'll have them attached to you.
Will that
some names.
Will that player think that Thibs is an
I'll
asset?
just say some names, okay? I'm just going to say some names. Can we get it? Okay, I'll say a name, and if you say nothing, I'll assume that
I already know one.
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
This is what they teach you at Northwestern.
Exactly right.
The whole league is watching, obviously, what happens with Giannis, and certainly the Knicks are one of them. And the question is, whether it's Giannis or another player like him, is Thibs a plus or a minus? If Giannis called up Jalen Brunson and asked what it was like to play for Thibs, Jalen Brunson would give the biggest glowing answer you'd ever hear.
Sure would.
But it really, that's the one thing. To me, the Knicks are going to be Thibs. The question is, for the Knicks to be still playing into June, is Thibs an asset or a detriment when it comes to bringing a star? That's an open question.
Look, the complicated thing about this to me is that we live in a world, and Monica, you say this a lot, and I like when you say this, is sometimes both things are true, or all things are true. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where everything's got to be either A or B. The reality is, in this case, it's somewhere in the middle. It's sort of B sharp, right? I mean, the reality is they would never be where they are without him. The players love him, swear by him. He took a bunch of like young, scrappy, hungry guys and turned them into this team that became a 2 seed. And if they were healthy, they would still be playing right now. And I'd give them a puncher's chance against the Celtics. But they're not healthy, and his teams generally tend not to be. And that can either just be a coincidence and a lot of bad luck, or there can be a cause and effect relation.
One of the things I will say, while we got to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt in this situation, the guys that we mentioned that didn't play, this could have been the deepest team Tom Thibodeau ever coached in his entire career.
Right.
So go back and look at the rosters and the depth charts of the Bulls teams and the Minnesota Timberwolves teams.
Right.
They didn't look like this if those 4 guys are healthy. So let's see if Thibs could have adjusted to having that wealth of depth, where he's looking out at a game and he's seen a guy that just played as hard as he could for 8 straight minutes. He's got another option on the bench instead of making that guy play 4 more minutes and get to the quarter break. That's what he was forced to do in this situation because guys weren't playing.
Thank you, Legs.
I just say I listened to you guys throughout the course of the game. Wasn't there a debate around the course of the season around whether he should go to a 9-man rotation?
Yeah, there was a little bit of
that was a legitimate thing.
And
I understand. I'm just once again like Wendy. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. It's reasonable. Like it's reasonable because it follows. I'm not saying it's a true depiction of what occurred. It is reasonable.
It is reasonable. But if ever there was an opportunity to really look at what has happened with this team, it is this season. That's all I'm saying. It's reasonable, right? And if you really want to go reasonable, those folks with the night lights and the lamps, they knew that during the course of the regular season, when he dabbled in the 9-man rotation, the 9th guy wasn't as productive as you need to be as a rotation guy that comes in late in terms of a short amount of time to make an impact. And so, listen, they were still standing in a Game 7 because of their depth, despite all of the injuries.
And the other way you could say is that Leon Rose.
He had 3-4 really great games.
Alec Burks, the last 4 games, was like the second best player on the team. Playoff starter, I forgot he was
not in the rotation.
When they brought him off the bench, I was like, wait a minute, they have him again? Like, he didn't even play.
Listen, but these guys know how difficult it is to get in rotation when you get 5 minutes. Go hit this jumper or sit down. And it wasn't falling.
When a guy stands up to check in a game and you see like moths fly away, it's kind of surprising.
And
like,
wow, final thought, on behalf of the people with the lamps
and the sheets, don't forget the sheets.
I slept as a child in New York Knicks number 10 footy pajamas. Walt Frazier, 100% true story.
As a child, okay.
As a grown man.